Welcome to the New Monastics podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics podcast. I'm Nathaniel, co-founder of Charis Foundation and dialogue partner for our guests.
And I'm Daniel, the host for the show.
Today, we're honored to have my friend, Grandmother Arapata, an indigenous grandmother of Maori and Samoan descent who lives in New Zealand. She is the proud mother of 6 and grandmother of 20.
Welcome, Arapata. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Kia ora, and thank you for having me.
This is fantastic. It's been a long time since we've actually got to talk. And I was just thinking, we were last together at a dialogue outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I think it was 2018.
Oh, wow.
So it's been about 5 years. And we hit it off there. Even so, it occurred to me, I don't know a lot about your background. And I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about how you grew up and whether you grew up with traditional ways or whether you had to reclaim them over time or combination.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be with you and share this space and time. To answer your question, it's a bit of both. My background, I am Maori and Samoan, born and raised until I was a teen in Aotearoa, or New Zealand. And then my parents had the grand idea of immigrating to the US, which in the long run turned out really well, in the essence of, by moving there, a lot of my younger years were spent with my grandmothers, my nannies, my family. And so traditional teachings just ran through everyday life. In going to the US, what happened there is my mother taught us to be very proud of who we were and reminded us that we'd be like ambassadors, of this culture, which was true. So there was always this sense of deep pride for our cultures. Mm-hmm. Coming back to Aotearoa and reconnecting in my adult years, I have come to realize that what that opportunity in the US gave me was that I didn't have a lot of the stigmas that are put on direct colonization, So I know who I was, who I am. I am not ashamed of that, or in any way felt to feel less. Connecting to the traditions has always been because our mother was a traditional woman. Despite the countries we were in, there's just those cords that will always connect you. And the teachings of my grandmother about what is correct in our culture, tapus or taboos, how to respect Mother Earth, how to respect each other, and also an essence of who we were in relation to each other and Mother Earth. So the reconnection happened by coming home, yet it was consistent in my home.
Can I ask a clarifying question here?
Sure.
It seems like you're speaking to a different history between Native Americans and indigenous people in the island of New Zealand, and how that history difference for you was you saw a different kind of self-relation in relation to your own tradition. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. I feel that by being an immigrant to the US, it has allowed me to understand the colonist way of coming here to New Zealand, like the ancestors. Many people look at Kiwis or English people, Europeans who have come to New Zealand as entitled. Yes, because they are building their fortunes, their everything on the plunderings of the people before them, their ancestors. Now, that can create a lot of anger and hurt. And mind you, there's a lot of hurt still carried within my DNA, of course. But being in the US as an immigrant and seeing how we were able to flourish, although we did interact with the Native Americans, it wasn't till I was a young adult, and it wasn't in the same way as people do here. But it gave me an understanding that I didn't realize their suffering, not really. And I didn't realize how far behind the plate, the starting line, indigenous are. Especially when you're First Nation, but you're living as a third nation within a First Nation. Mm. And it wasn't until I came home to New Zealand that I realized, it's not done out of malice. When we were living in the States, it was just trying to survive, trying to make sure my children had a good opportunity for their futures. And so it's helped me work here back in Aotearoa, understanding that many of the colonialist ways are wrong. But there's got to be a bridge between their descendants and us to create a better tomorrow and not wallow in the pain of yesterday. And so I feel that's the biggest gift I was given. Mm-hmm. Did that help?
Yeah. Thank you for unpacking that and clarifying.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. Daniel's mother is an Italian immigrant, to the U.S., and my mother's family are Mexican immigrants to the United States. And I grew up with a somewhat similar and different sense of being an immigrant, it sounds like, or from an immigrant family. I was intensely proud of being Mexican, but there was also a great sense of loss around it. We lost language very quickly because when my grandparents came to the United States, it was a period in which you just assimilated as soon as possible. And so my mother doesn't speak Spanish. In fact, I speak more Spanish than my mother, and had to reclaim some of that. And so for me, there's a lot of sense of loss, and yet a wonderful pride in family traditions. And those things stayed in the family. Like we still operate like a Mexican family, but without some of the more obvious cultural trappings. And that feels like a loss. But it sounded like for you, if I heard you right, the sense of coming to the U.S. isolated and strengthened some of those traditions?
It did, very much so. Now, I grew up in the era of our language was not allowed to be spoken. Mm. My mother was beaten. We were hit by our teachers, if they heard us speaking. So I think it was a conscious effort by my mother's generation to keep us safe, not to pass it down as much, and also to allow us to learn what they thought was going to be a better way, the future. Now there's been a huge renaissance, and the language has come back, and it's been a very purposeful movement that started in the 1970s when Maoris finally said enough. Mm-hmm. And they gathered in a big huio gathering, whether you were a chief or no matter what you did, a teacher, whatever you did, they came together and they created movements. One was to bring the language back, starting with pre-kindergarten, preschool, with parents, because they knew the parents didn't know. So the parents would come to school, the mom or the dad or whoever, with their child and learn things like the days of the week and things of that nature. And so now I've got nieces and nephews and grandnieces that are fluent. And we are seeing it on TV. I mean, there was a time when you can say kia ora, to say hello. So it's becoming a little more prevalent, a lot more actually, enough so to get pushback.
So there was a period of obvious colonial oppression, and then, like in many places, and starting in the 70s, a resurgence of pride and reclamation. But you're saying now, with that reclamation, there's coming a kind of a second pushback against that.
And that's been constant, here. I mean, we've only been a conquered land since the late 1800s, early 1900s,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think where I look at it from my vantage point is that as Maori becomes more prevalent, the sharing gets a little pushback from just the old way of thinking, the colonial oppression. Maori is very much inclusive about us all working together. So I'm hoping that things will continue to change and be progressive. And tomorrow is a brighter day. It is the hope.
Mm-hmm. And did you raise your children in the U.S.?
They were. Their father is American, and so they were raised there. But if I can just go on to another point, if I might,
Please.
and that would be the type of work that I do. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
This morning, coming to the podcast, I really liked it because it was a little not scripted and just allowed to flow in that. And with the work that I do, it's about chaos, which is really good for the world today. I work with the womb, and so I work with generational pain and understanding how you are your greatest healer and how to release that. And one of the things that I thought was very sweet about today's meeting is that in the womb, you must learn to sit in chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Because in chaos, all things are possible. Nothing is a given, it's not a system. And so I really like the natural flow of how you work your podcast and how we're working, because it's very in sync with the work that I do in the healing field. In today's world, I would say that it's very concerning, but not overwhelmingly so, that the changes that are happening, it's a crazy world
Mm-hmm.
from when we met 5 years ago, We've gone through a pandemic. It's hard to know who to believe and what's right, and depending on what information you have. And so I think it's really important now to know you,
Mm-hmm.
And learn to trust your gut, as they say. Learn to trust your intuition, and what does that mean, and who are you to know you? And it's interesting because those questions are the ones that are coming up in my work now. It's kind of changed focus.
Can you explain a little bit what you mean by you work with the womb in relation to generational pain?
Yeah. So in working with the womb, it is helping women to understand that they have a natural right to hold two worlds, the seen and the unseen world.
Mm.
And that's because in the womb, they create life. Yeah, they create a body in which spirit can come in and out. How sacred is that temple? So when you access that wisdom again, you naturally hold both worlds. So the work that I do, which deals with generational pain, is when that ability has been lost or blocked, through trauma. Now, often in wars, you see where they will pillage, and they'll take what they want, and that's the greed. But the raping comes for the power.
Mm.
Because when you block a woman from that natural ability to hold two worlds, she is not able to pass that wisdom down. through the generations.
Mm.
And so it's about learning how to release all that generational, I'll just say what it is, shit, you know. And I say it that strongly because anything else people will try to like, oh yeah, but it's not that bad. But you know, shit is shit. Don't want to touch it, don't want to be near it. Just get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about releasing that. And it's just been passed down through generations of subjugation, marginalization. And so it's empowering a woman to come to peace within herself with tools. And it's these tools don't connect them to me, they connect them to their ancestors. And that's really important to know who you are, where you're from. And with that, because on my travels, I do meet a lot of people who are, well, shall we say, borrowing is a nice term, or appropriating is the more realistic term, others' cultures. And so my question to them is, but who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Because within you, you have a wealth of wisdom and knowledge from your culture that they spent generations learning. And when you touch into it through your DNA, it's also yours. And oftentimes it's trapped in the negative, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a negative blockage, it usually holds the gift, the positive side that has to do with your heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it seems like the corollary to that kind of blockage is then a coinciding kind of projection and a romanticization upon a different culture or tradition that you in some way idealize as a way of kind of not dealing with your maybe own conflictions around your home tradition or home lineage.
Well, yes, I would agree with that, and no. Because I think a lot of people seek spiritual help, you know, in their spiritual bodies, and they're misguided. You've got a lot of people that hold these amazing ceremonies that aren't of their culture, and so they pray. There's a level of people that prey upon those who are seeking for help. And because it is and should never be systemized, it's open to charlatans. I'm afraid it's not an easy field to be in. One of the things that I really push is that in psychology today, we need to be holistic. And you can't just treat the mental body and the emotional body without taking into account the spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And often when I'm teaching overseas, the psychologists that come to these courses will tell me, I can't teach what you're saying, or else I would lose my license. And it's true. So it's like, well, change that, because, you know, this, if we're talking about healing, healing is healing. It is not maintaining, you know, a sickness. And I see a lot of that. It's in our medical system. When you go to get help, it's not to heal you, it's just to maintain your,
Right.
you know, put you on pills and that. So healing is simple. The way it's done in the work that I do, it is gentle, it is loving, it is just very, without a lot of fanfare, and just a good dose of common sense,
Mm-hmm.
because it's in you. You are your greatest hero. So in this field, there's just a lot of work right now to help people understand their wisdom and to trust it.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to really strengthening your intuition, because you're going to need it with the chaos around us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm tempted to go in two different directions
Can
at
we take
once.
the easy one?
I'm going to go in the more challenging direction. You mentioned, like, it's been an interesting 5 years since we last saw one another. A lot has happened and changed, I would say. And I feel as if, you know, in psychological terms, we've seen our own shadow, and like we've gone down the rabbit hole, maybe as far as we can go, I hope, with a certain kind of living, and I think we've seen the problems with it. And you seem to be alluding to this. I feel like one of the most interesting things about a human being is our capacity to abstract, that we can think in as if terms, like we can feel into and wear different masks and understand things from different perspectives. But I feel like we've gone beyond the usefulness of that capacity, where most people around the planet are tending to live in abstraction and not in relationship to their bodies, to the planet, to each other. And they're living in this remarkable human capacity for abstraction, but it's now exiled us from the world of relation and relationship and from ourselves. And it's a kind of maddening place. When you live outside of your body, you're in a world where your whole, mind system can be co-opted by any little, meme online or whatever. Like we can be taken over by these things because we no longer have the anchor in the body. And I feel like what we saw during the pandemic was an example of unrootedness run amok.
Mhm.
And so, how do we root again? I think we can be impressed by this capacity that we have. I think we can be grateful for it. But now it's become pathological. And I think we can even be grateful that it was evolving something that we needed to find out. And yet we may destroy ourselves if we don't get a hold of it and reroute it soon. So how do we reroute?
We play. Yeah. We play.
We play.
You have to find the joy. To reroute, you need joy. Yeah. I mean, it's part of the reason why we went off into our little abstraction there. But to come back, and it sounds simple, but it's really not. When you play in a joyful way, it's about doing something that really entices you to engage in your physical life. It's like if you took a pill or had a shake for every meal, just chug it down and go, chug it down and go. We need to taste. We need to engage our senses of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and seeing. It's just, we need to stop being so in our head and truly find the joy in our lives. Physical things that engage us. Connect to Mother Earth. Garden, if that brings you joy. Walk in nature, if that brings you joy. Soak in the ocean. But find things to bring us back here. And not in a negative way, not in a way that you must, because then that's just more of the reason why we bounced out, but just in a very gentle, playful manner. What really makes us smile? That smile that makes your eyes come alive. That would be my answer.
That's great. I feel like there's an implicit distinction too that you're making because, anybody turns on a television or even their computer screen is getting an invitation to what looks like play.
Mhm.
They're getting an invitation to buy a vacation. In fact, it seems to be the ideal of most people to live life as if they're on vacation. And so it's a cruise, it's, a trip to Maui or whatever. And somebody wants to sell us that. And I feel like there's a distinction between the play and the tasting that you're talking about and that vacation life that we're being marketed.
I think because play needs to be daily. And it shouldn't cost. If you watch a child, and how they can create things out of sticks and stones and sand. I mean, it's that type of simplicity and play that I'm speaking of. It's so important that we as adults try to engage, because there's another thing that happens when you play. Is you start having conversations or talking to the people around you. You're open, you're creating. This is also something that has gone by the wayside in the last few years. Everyone has an opinion that they can blast out in a meme. No one wants to discuss. It's either yes, no, right, wrong. And so, although I say play in its simplest form, it does have that root that creates, you're playing, you're enjoying something that you do daily, you engage. Engaging creates discussions, relationships, etc.
So now I'll go back to my easier question. How did you come into doing the work with women's wombs and healing around that?
That's a really good one. I never ever set out to do this work. It just, a series of things happened in life that pointed me towards it. And the more I came into it, the more I followed my smile, my joy, the more I found that it led towards this work there. And that's just the truth of that. Nothing earth-shattering, it just was a simple meandering down a chaotic path, but just always following my smile. Yeah.
And at what stage of life did you begin doing that? Because I know you have 6 children. You were raising kids.
Yeah. True. I would say full time, to where my energies were solely directed in this, was in my 50s. Yeah, so it's been like 14, 15 years, something like that. But I would say that I've always worked with women in different capacities over my lifetime.
And are there, traditional teachings and ways that support the work that you're doing now? Were you mentored in this or invited into it?
I still am mentored into it. And no, it's not an invitation. It's more of when it's what you should be doing, and things just come together that open up, if I can say that, the universe comes to sweep you along your path. And then I've had beautiful teachers within my own culture that have showed up as I've needed to give me what I've needed and then to move on. And that's the big thing about Maori. We come together, we touch base, and then we move on to continue our work.
If you're enjoying the episode, please consider subscribing to our Patreon to help support the production of the podcast.
Subscriptions begin at $1. All patrons receive access to bonus content, curated resources, and exclusive patron events, including live Q&As.
For more information, please check out the Patreon link in the show notes, and thanks for listening.
So I have a question. I'm not sure how to frame it, and I know that it has come up from time to time where there's a need or calling to work with men. And since most of your work is with the womb and with women, what is it when you work with men? What are you working with there?
That's a really great question. So when I work with women, we're usually dealing with her relationship with her mother. When I work with men, we're dealing with their relationship with their grandmothers.
The grandmothers.
Yes, it's a kind of when you think of your grandmother, you usually think of someone very kind or, removed, but as special. It doesn't have the edge of parent, your father, mother. And so when I work with men, it's very gentle work. When men come into this work, they are ready for it. So they're very open, and it's very important to, as we work together, to them understand that their space is theirs, mine is mine, which goes to helping them understand how to hold their space. Not in a dominant way, but just to hold their space in a loving, kind way. When you work with men, it's about the safety to dream again. if not for the first time. I mean, women may be marginalized in this world as we know it, but men come into this world marginalized, preset from a very young age. The dream is taken away. And it usually comes with the age that you can remember the first fairy tale. That gentle little story that goes over and over and over is usually the one that takes the place of dreams. So it's learning to create a new narrative for yourself and give yourself the permission and the safety to do so.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend that's written a lot on racism. She's a Black American woman, and the way she wrote about it was so interesting because she says, when you have a racist system, it's a corrupt system, which means it corrupts everyone in it. I mean, there are people that are victimized by it, but ultimately the system victimizes everybody, including the victimizers. They're corrupted by the system themselves. So everybody is a victim of the corrupt system. And it seems similar with patriarchy, where, women are certainly oppressed under patriarchy, but so are men from a perspective because it's a corrupt system. And it seems to be implicit in what you're saying.
That's very well put. And so it's really this work in the womb when it concerns men, because I do hold, right now I am holding circles that have men and women in it. And I will say that the women in this circle have got to have come through the other workshops first before they can enter this circle, because when men open up at such a deep level, the moment a woman tries to help, it could just be the most simplest thing of, you should do this or that. It shuts them off, as it should, because no one should reach into your sacred space, the space between you and Creator and you and your ancestors. So it's a learning process for the women, because we're natural sharers and helpers. And for the men, it's one of courage to even step into the circle. So here I am, as I am, and that is enough.
So you just mentioned ancestors. And I've had a wonderful discussion with my wife over the last several years. I work in a very liberal university, and there's been a lot of discussion of whiteness. And my wife and I have had a really interesting discussion about it, where we've come up with language for ourselves that seems satisfactory, where whiteness to us is not about skin color, though certainly associated, with that historically, but is about the bleaching out of culture, the whitewashing of culture, the bleaching out of it so that we lose our connections to our cultures and family and ancestors. And it's this, that becomes this kind of whitewashed, bleached commodity culture, substitutes for genuine rooted culture and knowing ourselves in relationship to our ancestors. And so, what is that relationship to our ancestors that keeps us, again, rooted and stable in the chaos of the world?
Well, first I want to say that whitewashing happens within white Europeans as well. I work a lot in Europe, and their gathering back of their traditions and their wisdom has been an ongoing process, and it goes beyond nations. It goes into like the Slavics, the Vikings, the Druids, back deep into their cultures. I believe that why that grounds us is because in all indigenous cultures, and we're all indigenous, just some of us are more whitewashed than others, it always connects us back to Mother Earth and being the guardians of Mother Earth, not the owners. of living in harmony with our surroundings, you know? And that rooting into our cultures, all of them, as I've traveled the world, I have found that we're very similar, the different indigenous cultures, you know, the way we honor what's around us and nature and the elements and humanity. So I would say that in coming back to your ancestry and what's in your DNA, you are able to be one again with your surroundings. You know, you're able to really realize that water that you flush your toilet with really comes from somewhere, just not out of the bowl, you know. And I think that's where a lot of people in this whiteness have been removed, is from the simplicity and the realistic nature of how things work. You know, point in case, our smartphones. They're smart, I'm dumber. I've come to realize that. There was a time when I knew many numbers, phone numbers that I could just, and I don't. I barely remember my own. So the more we give away of ourselves for ease, the less connected we stay.
Yeah. The conversation about ancestors is bringing me back to where we were very early on in speaking about intergenerational pain. And I have this sense of ancestors as very embodied, kind of visceral feeling of carrying our ancestors with us, almost like a Russian nesting doll, you know, like inside of me are all of my ancestors. And it's not just the stories that are passed along explicitly, but the stories that are written into our DNA, and how we now know with epigenetics, I believe is the like scientific field of like the study of DNA, or the study of DNA's adaptability, but that we know that DNA is much more malleable than previously thought about, that our actions, intentions, the way we live our lives, and the experiences that we go through can actually and do actually change our DNA. And I think from a spiritual sense, or a spiritual understanding and feeling, there's that sense of that those stories are still with us. And this kind of pain that we feel is not just patterns that are passed along, but there's almost a very direct sense of if something was left unprocessed or a wound was still open for one of our ancestors, we have that same wound from that same experience, not just the echo of it. And then to just get into a little bit more heady idea, which feels very resonant, I'm curious about your perspective on this, is that in a kind of magical way, or a way that doesn't make sense to the linear mind because it's beyond the kind of confines of linear time, that when we heal ourselves, that healing extends forwards to the future generations, and also in some mysterious ways backwards. That in our healing, our ancestors are also healed, and in this idea that almost every moment of time is interconnected, and that there is this mysterious connection between past and future. And I'm curious just for your perspective on that idea, because it feels like a level that we don't normally talk about with ancestors or ancestry, and more of a, you can't explain it with the mind or get somebody, you're not going to convince somebody by talking to them about it. But I've had some experiences like this myself, and talked to many people who feel that this kind of thing to be true, or at least in some way true.
Well, I believe it's true. And in the work that I'm involved in, it definitely does that. This is why you, as the individual today living, need to be present in your body and not out there in the abstract, because the change happens here. And when you create that change, especially with the knowledge that you are moving something And usually generational change is something that no matter what you do, no matter how much you get, counseling you get, or whatever, you just keep hitting that wall, you know? And so coming into one of my circles means you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah. That's how you know you're ready. Because once you're in this space, it is about being aware of the strength you have, that when you do your healing, you're healing for the future and the past naturally. That's why you need to be present. Yeah. And what you said, I love the word magic because it sounds silly and it is sometimes the only word we can use. Mm-hmm. Like, wow, that's magic. That's magical. Because when you do change both the past and the future, you find that in the present, things start to move and converge in a way that, what a coincidence, or it's magic, because you are without these blockages. You've released them, but also in releasing the blockage, you release the gifts into your life. So absolutely agree with what you're saying. And would just put a big exclamation mark on, this is why we must stay present. Stay in a state of engagement with our lives.
I think an interesting consequence of what you're speaking to is, and again, I'm curious on your perspective of this, is that maybe like ancestor work in healing ancestral wounds doesn't even need to be explicitly working with our ancestors, but in and as much as we contain those wounds within ourselves through the deep personal healing, the ancestral healing is implicit there. And for myself, I've had part of these experiences is having opportunities to do things or do things safely that my ancestors didn't. And consciously bringing that into moments of, if I'm enjoying some kind of thing that my ancestors didn't get to enjoy, almost calling them into my personal experience and almost like inviting them to enjoy it along with me. Or at the point I'm trying to make here is the connection between personal healing and ancestral healing, that they're maybe not two distinct things, but two completely interrelated and intertwined things, and that one leads to the other and vice versa.
No, it can. Yes, absolutely, it can. And I think, when we do our work and we call in ancestors, it's very simple. And the ancestors are here for you. Yours are for you. Mine aren't for you, And the most important thing, why you have to hold your sacred circle and space around you and not get interference from outside, is to learn how to reconnect your connections, how to listen, and how to speak with and communicate with your loved ones, And so we're always very careful that it's done in the most positive ways, and the ones who are called are the ones who are ready to work. A lot of what I see in the spiritual world is people going, okay, I'm spiritual, and therefore everything will flow to me, and I'm going, wake up, you're spiritual, good thing. You've always been spiritual. Great that you see that. You're the spirit that came into your mother's womb and will leave your body at room temperature. So good that you see you. But then it's about learning how to engage with that without making it a separate part of you, but an everyday part. And in doing that, it does exactly what you say. It just naturally flows with your loved ones, your ancestral line, your culture. There's such a richness within that.
Right.
So yeah. I don't know if that answered that or...
No, it does. And it helps clarify, because what I hear in what you're saying, a nuance that you're bringing to what I said, and a distinction, is that personal healing isn't inherently ancestral healing, and that there seems to be power, the kind of, again, magic ingredient is a certain kind of awareness. And we have to invite the ancestors in, and we have to build that relationship to really actualize the connection between the personal and ancestral healing.
Yeah, and I like that you brought in this spirituality in air quotes. There's a way of being spiritual and talking about spirituality that is just another abstraction, just another way of being outside of yourself, whereas spirituality is this special thing. If it's seen as exceptional and accepting us out of our body, then it's just another part of the disease, that we're suffering from. And so we have to root this spirituality in our everyday lives. Coming back to the ancestor subject, and I reference this a lot, that, Carl Jung said that in this life, we don't answer our own questions. We think, that our lives exist so that we can answer the questions that we have. He said that we answer the questions of the dead. We answer the questions that our ancestors had, that they were not able to riddle out in their lifetime, but we exist to answer the questions that came from before. And this is interesting to me, especially as another Jungian therapist, James Hillman, said. He says, a lot of people will come to you as a therapist with, mama and papa stuff. He says, but mostly what they're really dealing with is ancestor stuff, not as local as their parents. He said, so every person should imagine their 8 great-grandparents sitting at a table eating dinner together, and then realize that's what's going on inside you. Can those people even talk to each other? Are they stabbing each other with a fork? And that's very interesting to me, that we exist to answer the questions of the dead. And so there's a kind of service that we do for them. But then I think about how our ancestors support us. There's this wonderful movie called Amistad about a slave ship that washed up in the United States. And the main character was a historical person, Cinque. He's asked, how's he going to get through this process? What's he going to do? How's he going to know what to say? And he says that he's going to call on his ancestors. And he says, and they must come, because at this moment, I am the sole reason that they ever existed. And so I want to bring up, what does it mean to have support from our ancestors?
Oh, it's a very individual answer. What does it mean to you? How does that integrate with you? I can't tell you. It's your communication, your relationship with them. My question would be, how is your communication with them? Is it strong? Or do you even believe in it? What are you on about, so to say, when it comes to relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just another relationship. Your ancestral relationship that they have with you, they're always there. I call them my posse, my peeps. We hang out together. They're really good people. I love them, and they keep me in line. But that's my relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I'm in the thickest of things that I don't do this work without them. It would be ridiculous, because me personally, I only have 64 years of knowledge, and half of that was making the mistakes of life. So, good deal.
You're lucky it's only half.
Well, I'm being kind to myself, of course. But I feel that it's very important not to create a framework on what that looks like. It's really important to create a bridge to that for each individual. One of the things in working with me you'll find is that you never share. We don't want your stories. You stay in your circle. We don't even want your conversations, because you're so busy doing this that you're not doing this. You're not going inward. You're not trying to relate, because it's easier to be heard by someone physical. And that takes a muscle, just strengthening the muscles. And depending on how strong or how intense you want your relationship to be, will depend on how it guides you in life. I'm not sure if that's much of an answer, Natanya.
No, I like it because I'm asking, from this place of you hear certain things and they ring with truth, but you don't necessarily have it worked out what they mean. And, I heard truth in those things, that I was referencing. And the connection that I'm making from what you're just saying is that we have the support that we cultivate with our ancestors. If we've made, a broad road for coming and going, in that relationship, that's the support we can have. But we have to cultivate that support. We have to make those relationships.
And I would say this, that it's so important in not only in my work, but in today's world, to find your joy, to be engaged with life. This has a huge part of how you interact with your ancestors. And I was very blessed and am very blessed to still be able to be taught by them, as well as the nannies that I have and the healers that surround me.
So I've had a kind of left field thought come up, and doesn't seem to be clearly connected to our conversation at all, but it's about artistic process.
Super.
The role of artistic process, or how we're all artists, and if we're not, there's something that's not authentic in the way we're living. It's just totally coming up, and I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
I have to agree with that. And by artist, I mean creativity.
Yeah.
To someone else, my creativity might look like junk. But for me, it's bringing me great joy to create it. And I think it's essential. It really is an essential part. However you choose that art form to be in your life, it's necessary for us to keep creating. This is what we do. This is what makes us us, And it doesn't have to be AI or, more abstract things. It would be nice if we could come down and create things together that used our hands. And so I don't know why it keeps popping into my head, like gardening, community gardens and that.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. Let me take that back. I would say it's essential to have art, have an art form, like creative outlet that is positive.
And maybe it connects to joy, the way we were talking about joy earlier.
Why would you do it if it didn't? Also, with healing, I do want to say this. I see a lot of healers that take people through the rigors and the pain. And I feel that when they're done that, got the t-shirt, no need to put it back on again. Healing is gentle, realigning to identify what you need to heal. May be a little painful, but it is short. It's like resetting a bone, which is quick. But when you actually heal, it's about resting, right? It's that time after that the bone needs to start naturally doing what it does. And so when we talk about healing, let me be very practical about it. It means rest, to observe, to read a book, to do something that allows other things to take over that are above our pay grade to see with our eyes, like a broken bone that's mending.
Then what is that painful part of it about? What is the necessity of the painful part of that healing process?
Well, let's just say if you break a bone, the resetting of the bone in order to align that bone so it can heal properly. When I do my work, just the mere fact that you showed up is the resetting of that bone.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first part of the work, it's painful, but in kind of a not painful way. When you understand who you are and the immensity of your strength and your wisdom that you already hold, that you don't have to seek or be degreed in, but is innately yours, tends to bring a lot of people to tears as they align to their truths. Yeah.
So as we come in for a close, maybe I'll ask a friend question. What is bringing you joy these days?
Oh gosh, being home is a lot of joy. I would say on a personal basis to be quite simple and finding each day something kind of exciting to live.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that can't be more complicated than it is.
Well, you'll try harder next time.
Oh.
No, it's a journey to become ourselves. That's one of the things that you learn as you get older is how long it took to become yourself and why we went to so much trouble over the whole matter, and got so far from ourselves thinking about our identities, so obsessed with our identities that we forgot to be ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's so simple.
Yeah. And I'd like to take that back to something that Daniel said earlier about, ancestry and the wisdom and the wealth that comes from that, is that when you understand that you're not alone, that you really are part of a beautiful fabric and you're just a wonderful color within it, that need to be an individual that is only dependent on themselves is kind of removed. And you realize you are that wonderful color, but you're also part of a beautiful tapestry of color.
Right. It's almost like we have this pressure, whether internal or societal, to be the whole spectrum of the rainbow. But we only have to be one color. We only have to be our color, and the rest of the spectrum is filled out. There's a beautiful diversity on this planet. Lots of people have lots of different everything, and this kind of spectrum gets filled out. I think that that's really interesting, because if we were isolated units to be complete, we would need to kind of be everything. And of course, that's pathological. And so then feeling that sense of interconnection and more of the web or net feeling, it's like, oh, I can simultaneously be my thread and be fully that thread and fully this individual in particularity, and feel like I am a part of this whole and I'm playing this role, and I don't need to be more than what I am. I think that's the pathology there. It's like we all want to be or try to be more than what we are, which of course is impossible. And we are enough, and we are more than what we think we are.
Absolutely. And I think at a very young age, we're sold that package, just like vacation is a package. Mm-hmm. It's like, why can't my life be a vacation? I mean, why does my life have to be so stressful that I need a vacation? Is that what I want? Is that how I best live me? So,
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Arapata. It's been so lovely. And as we do kind of come in for a close here, our kind of tradition is to end with some kind of short offering from our guests, whether a quote, a poem, prayer, song, anything that feels right. And I'm wondering if you have something to share with us today.
I thought about that, and I thought, So I just have two things. Be kind, but first be kind to yourself.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shout out to friend of the show, Treefort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.